Doom Eternal is an easy game to pick up, but a difficult one to fully master. But apparently this sentiment is not expressed by all players. When the game was first released, there was a sizable portion of the community that felt like Doom Eternal was too hard and aggressive for first time players, and I have to disagree. If we look at the first section of Hell on Earth, it lays out all of the game's core mechanics in a streamlined way. Glory kills give you health, and the chainsaw gives you ammo, and this is explained right off the bat. Doom Eternal shows you that it's more resource management heavy than last time. As for the difficulty, I think there are some frustrating placements of enemies, like the Arachnotron in the subway tunnel, but that's all part of the engagement process. You're going through Doom Eternal and perhaps you're not taking off weak points or just breezing through sections. This Arachnotron is your first taste of reality, in which there are sections where destroying weak points will result in either life or death. I would imagine that id Software intended players to die here the first time rounds, but once they reassess the situation and take out the Arachnotron's turrets, they've basically won. The developers purposely put the Arachnotron in close proximity to you, so when you break its weak points, the Arachnotron only has melee to work with because you're too close to him to shoot out his other projectiles. This is excellent design and it perfectly predicts players' actions. Doom Eternal is closer to classic Doom than any other Doom game, and I think it falls in line with Plutonia a lot as well. In the Plutonia experiment, the Casali brothers had great knowledge on the monsters and their roles within combat, so they put them in areas that would challenge the players most. That's why there are so many revenants in tight spaces inside of Plutonia, because they provide an area of denial for players so they can't just walk in and blast them all with the rocket launcher. The same principle applies to Doom Eternal, and how id Software not only polished up the Doom chess pieces, but they knew exactly where to place them to bring out the most challenge and engagement from the player. Hell on Earth is a wake-up call to the people who played Doom 2016, and it clearly establishes that Doom Eternal is not just 2016 all over again. That's not to say that id Software wanted to make a hard game with Doom Eternal, because they didn't. Doom is a commercial product, and I'm sure they wanted to catch a wide audience. I mean, that's why there are difficulties in the first place. Ultra-violence is hard, especially when you're first starting out, and there's no shame in putting down the difficulty. I know that Nightmare is the best way to play the game, even according to id Software, but I still play on Ultra-violence most of the time. The only difference between the difficulty levels is how much damage you can take from the enemies. On the lower skill, you can take quite a lot of abuse, and if you're new to FPS games, you might want to start there. Ultra-violence has basically become the default setting for classic Doom over the years, but it's still hard mode, and I think people have forgotten that. That's why Sigil works so well for me, because I cannot beat it on Ultra-violence, and it is a true challenge. Dario Casali even said himself that he doesn't feel bad that players get frustrated with Plutonia on Ultra-violence, because it is the hardest skill next to Nightmare. Relaying this back to Doom Eternal, Hurt Me Plenty is the normal skill level, and if you need to start there, that's all good. The combat in Doom Eternal is there for you to master over time. id Software don't expect you to start from Nightmare from the jump. They want you to increase that difficulty slider on your terms. So no, I don't think Doom Eternal is inherently a hard game. There is still quite a lot to learn about Doom Eternal with its combat mechanics and everything, so I could understand if people say that it's an overwhelming game to get decent at, but I disagree with the notion that it's too hard or frustrating. I will say that I think that Doom 2016 is an easier game than Doom Eternal because the combat is much more streamlined and simple to get a good grasp of. I know that some people don't like Doom Eternal because it doubles down on resource management, weak points, weapons having clearer utility, etc., and that's perfectly fine if that's not your thing, but I can't say that it's too difficult for players to get through. Again, there are many things to learn in Doom Eternal, so first time players might be like, what the fuck, how can I get a hold of all of these new mechanics? But the game is still fun on its own and makes you want to learn its combat puzzle. I actually think that Doom Eternal is a more forgiving game in certain aspects compared to Doom 2016. The platforming, while there is a lot more of it than in Doom 2016, is fairer because you don't have to reset from a checkpoint when you fall off of a cliff in Doom Eternal. Also, the inclusion of extra lives in the game grants players more chances to mess up in arena combat, and it doesn't force them to start back from a checkpoint until you run out of them. However, there are more mechanics to learn in the game, and players are probably more prone to slipping up, so that kind of balances itself out. Some of the early arenas in Doom Eternal are meant to track frustration points, but it gives you a clear idea of how you fucked up. The first level in the game is full of those moments, and while some players might be turned off by them initially, they ultimately make players better over time. If you are too frustrated by the game's arenas and what it's trying to teach you, then lower the difficulty. I have relatives that are younger than me that need the difficulty lowered, but they're still performing the same actions as me when I play Doom Eternal. They are still able to kill the Marauder, they still target weak points, they are doing the same combat loop as more experienced players, but they take less damage in the process, and once they get used to that, we could up the difficulty level later on from there. The difficulty levels in Doom Eternal provide almost all people an opportunity to get decent at the game and derive some enjoyment from the combats. Like I said earlier, id Software don't want to make a hard game for the sake of being hard. They want you to ultimately enjoy the experience, but they also want to give you something to master and to make the combat loop something that you can chew on for a while. Doom is a commercial property, and it's in id Software's best interest to make an accessible game, which is why I'm even more impressed by the route they took. They didn't just decide to make Doom 2016 version 2. Instead, they took the basic combat of Doom 2016 and ran with it, transforming it from an entertaining yet rather shallow combat loop into what it is now with Doom Eternal. I'm not trying to shit on Doom 2016 by the way, it was my favourite game from that year, and I appreciate how it rebooted the series so well. But Doom Eternal is an evolution of not only the Doom franchise, but the FPS genre as a whole. That being said, Doom Eternal is not Sekiro, and while some games are a trade-off in time, Doom Eternal is a trade-off in skill. They want you to master the combat loop, and that's evident with the Ancient Gods DLC. id Software threw in the spirits, bloodmakers, and all of the new environmental hazards for people who were 1. Already done with mastering the combat loop of the base game, and 2. Were used to using the same few weapon combos over and over and wanted to break up their cycle. I expect the Ancient Gods Part 2 to be even harder than Part 1, and I think it's fair to say that the DLC can be a little daunting and too hard for regular players. However, I can't say that about the base game, and the moments that do frustrate you, 99% of the time, that's id Software reaching out to teach you an important gameplay mechanic or feature. Thanks for watching.